my mention on a photograph. Yeah, I'm scratching on a thermostat. Yeah, I'm giving up on looking back. Yeah, I'm letting go of what I
In 1860, there was a meeting with the British Association for the Advancement of Science in June. Charles Darwin had written a book on the origin of species. This book was the hot topic in the scientific community and the wider public. Wilberforce had heard of what was happening and decided that he would take action. Wilberforce, who was better known as Soapy Sam, because of his noticeable smoothness of speech, decided he would debate Thomas Henry Huxley. He ridiculed Darwin's works and said that it is against the gospel. This is where things really started getting interesting. Wilberforce's closing remarks were made to provoke Huxley. He asked him if he was a descendant of apes. The audience started cheering and getting rather wild. Huxley stood up and said, "I'd rather have an ape for an ancestor than a bishop who distorted the truth." It played out a little something like this.
I wonder, Mr. Huxley, is it through your grandfather or your grandmother that you claim descent from an ape?
I stood up, very quiet, very grave, and said my say with perfect good temper.
If the question is put to me, would I rather have a miserable ape for a grandfather, or a man, highly intelligent, possessed of great means of influence, and yet who employed these faculties and that influence for the mere purpose of introducing ridicule into a grave scientific discussion? I unhesitatingly affirm my preference for the ape.
Are you working? What kind of work do you do? Huxley was arguing in Charles Darwin's defense, and because he believed in the theory of evolution, it was also about the time that the scientific community got the recognition that it deserved. He was debating for much more than winning an argument. He was debating for a fair trial for science. This is said to be the day where science threw off the shackles of religious authority. Wilberforce was plain and simply arguing for what he believed in. He believed that the theory of evolution directly went against his view of the world, and was very controversial to his beliefs. He then saw science as an opposition, thus starting the ongoing battle of science versus religion. Samuel Wilberforce was an English bishop in the Church of England and was commonly known as Soapy Sam, and was one of the best public speakers of his time. He gained most of his recognition, and for lack of a better word, fame, for his debate with Huxley. Thomas Henry Huxley was an English biologist who was known to be Charles Darwin's bulldog because he was a spokesman and advocate for Darwin's theory of evolution. His work paid off as the debate sparked a movement in the acceptance of evolution as a legitimate theory. Huxley coined the term agnostic, which is a person who believes that nothing is known or can be known of the existence or nature of God. This is a term that he strongly believed in, which has continued on to our present day. Huxley did not have much formal schooling and was predominantly self-taught. He researched on invertebrates and clarified relationships about groups which people knew very little about. He also specialised on relationships between apes and humans. Huxley was a pioneer in his scientific field. Darwin's theory of evolution is the widely held notion that all life is related and has descended from common ancestors. Darwin's general theory presumes that complex creatures evolved from more simplistic ancestors, and that this happens naturally over time. Random genetic mutations start occurring within the organism's genetic code. The mutations that are beneficial are preserved because they aid survival. This process is known as natural selection.
Most of us hear the word evolution and think of the process by which species change and adapt and maybe turn into other species or go extinct, but that's specifically the evolution of life forms by means of natural selection. The word evolution in general just means change or development, and there are plenty of other things that can evolve or change, and in plenty of other ways. For example, the universe can evolve, that is, change, according to the laws of physics. Galaxies form, planets and moons orbit, stars explode, etc. This doesn't mean there's any sort of cosmic survival of the fittest going on. That would be natural selection, not evolution. Similarly, the demographic makeup of the United States can evolve as children are born, young people move to cities, immigrants arrive in the country, and so on. In this sense, evolution just means change, and no one can deny that these changes are happening. The evidence is overwhelming. Similarly, around the time Charles Darwin was doing his research, scientists, including Darwin himself, had literally begun amassing piles of evidence that showed the nature of life on Earth had changed quite significantly over time. Our oldest rocks show no signs of life, while newer and newer rocks reveal fossilized plankton, seaweed, snails, fish, trees, insects, dinosaurs, mammals, and so on. There absolutely was and is no denying the fact that life on Earth changes, and change over time is what evolution means. What Darwin proposed with his theory of natural selection was an explanation for how this change, which is stupidly well supported by evidence, could have occurred naturally. You can think of it like the Challenger disaster of 1986. All the evidence showed that the collection of molecules named Challenger had tragically evolved from a space shuttle and its rocket boosters into a cloud of gas and debris shortly after launch. The question for scientists at the time was to understand and explain how the explosion had happened so they could prevent it in the future. Ultimately, it was the theory of frozen O-rings in the rocket boosters, popularized by Richard Feynman, that provided a satisfactory explanation for the cause of the disaster. Now, you're welcome to disagree with Feynman's explanation for the explosion, or Darwin's explanation for how life on Earth changes, but they're pretty darn good explanations for these incredibly well-documented examples of change in the universe. In the end, the universe will go on evolving regardless of whether you and I believe in it or understand it. And perhaps the best thing to do is to remember that it's okay for our beliefs and understandings to evolve too. That's part of life, and it's the way of science.
This conflict occurred because evolutionists like Huxley argue that creationism is not a theory that can be tested by the scientific method, where creationists like Wilberforce argue that evolutionists do not take God into account and claim that evolution is theory rather than fact. Science based their methods on physical evidence which cannot be proven because the Old Testament of the Bible is the only true account of creation. Science requires a hypothesis or theory which can be tested and supported by physical evidence, and religion is based off the acceptance of a doctrine requiring full faith. The Huxley and Wilberforce debate shows the continuity of this conflict, and based on what we have witnessed so far, we can see that it will be an issue in the scientific and religious community for years to come. For hundreds of years, evolutionists and creationists have been arguing, since the first debate of Huxley and Wilberforce. There are many cases for both evolution and creationism, and although they are opposite, you should not be condemned for believing in either one. Evolutionists and creationists can bicker and argue as much as they like. But they can agree on one thing. We all got here the same way, and we're all going to end up leaving through the same door. There is no dispute that we're all put on Earth. By whom or how it occurred doesn't matter, because we're all running the same race. We're all in this together.
I saw you walking in the city. We're all in this together. The city's changing, 'cause we're changing, and we're all